Good afternoon, everyone. We'll now have a special panel. Today is the Indigenous Peoples Day. It's a recent holiday, and today an agreement for peace and understanding has been signed, which probably with something you will touch on. This is a day of the Indigenous peoples, and I think it is important we can have the voice of representatives from the indigenous peoples. Andrés will introduce the people from the panel. They are all from the University of Chile. And the only thing I have to say is basically that it is a must to us that this day of the indigenous people can be recognized in the CHCI sessions. And it has a special characteristic, and this is why we call it a reivindication and native epistemologies to provide with this character and non-political, extremely political character with the reivindications we feel profoundly identified, which nowadays post-constituent assembly or Constituent Council, where many of the indigenous reivindications were expressing a constitutional project that was rejected. That might be a reason for other type of debate. But this is what I basically wanted to say, and now I'm going to offer the floor to Andrés. I adhere Pablo's words, and I thank Maribel, Salvador, and Verónica to be with us today. On behalf of the CHCI and the consortium and the meeting in this very important day, I will introduce them according to the place they are using at the table. And in first place, Maribel Mora, she's a poet and Mapuche researcher. She's a Spanish professor with a bachelor in education, educational and vocational counselor, master's degree from the University of Chile, and candidate for a PhD in American Studies. As a researcher, she has outstanding academic production, and their literary expression being recognized as a researcher and poet on a Latin American level. At present, she's the director of the Equity Office and Inclusion at the University of Chile. In second place, let me introduce Verónica Figueroa Huencho, full professor of the Government Faculty, Public Administrator, PhD in Management Sciences from the Barcelona University, postdoctoral studies at the Latin American Center for Studies in Stanford, from the David Rockefeller Center from the Harvard University. She has made several researches on political and indigenous policies at the University of Chile. She's been vice president of the Senate, the University Senate in 2 terms, being the first woman and the first Mapuche person in taking on that position. She has recently worked as an undersecretary of higher education during the 2023 term. And finally, let me introduce Salvador Millaleo Hernandez, assistant professor at the Faculty of Law at the University of Chile and researcher at the Human Rights Center from the same university, attorney from the Chile University, and doctor of sociology from the Germany Stadium. Their study focus original peoples as well as the relation between right and technology, the critical theory of the right, and legal sociology. He used to be counselor from the National Institute of Human Rights. I express my gratitude on behalf of CHCI, and I thank you for being here. And you may have the floor as you consider it pertinent. She's written in Mapuche language. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here and, of course, for opening the doors of the university and the importance it has. Open knowledge and the knowledge we have as indigenous people, which has been part of reivindication, historical ones, that to date have not found any solution. It was important to us as part of that intellectuality or intellectualism of this composition of intercultural dialogue to share what the big challenges still to do, which are the gaps we still need to shorten, and above all, which are the elements or key dimensions to effectively have and hold a dialogue. As it happens in many countries, and probably many of yours too, their relation, the relation with the state, from the states to the original people has been problematic and due to several reasons. First, because in that genesis of the state, as has happened in the Chilean case, a perspective, a look regarding the power and regarding how those power spaces are legitimate from a Western perspective, which early found in their republican ideals, in the nation ideals, in the ideals of equality. They found a parameter to civilize these savage people, these barbarian who were us, the indigenous peoples. And those principles guiding the nation state had a narrative and institutionality created to somehow taint throughout time an asymmetry of power, which also has an expression at the universities, in the educational models, in the ways we can legitimate and validate knowledge. And to us, as thinkers, as Mapuche thinkers, without a doubt is a challenge to break those paradigms, those limitations, those schemes, which has made the relation we can have with that institutionality continues to be burdened of tensions and conflicts. And it is that point that I would like to have as an initial reflection, because when we talk about the relation of indigenous peoples with their states and with their institutionality, this is not out of the blue, is with the context. And in our case, it is still under the context where there is no recognition of the rights. None of the political constitutions we have had to date has recognized indigenous peoples as such, as original nations, as peoples who were here prior to the creation of the states. Although the Chilean state recently has ratified several agreements and international agreements, it has not been reflected on a real concrete commitment to change those state structures. Nowadays, we don't have any institution representing indigenous peoples, for example, at the Congress. There's no any ministry of indigenous people addressing the elaboration of public policies for indigenous peoples and with the indigenous peoples. Neither we have a system at the legal power, the judiciary recognizes our custom law, which are still living. We talk on behalf of the Mapuche peoples, but that's the characteristic of all the indigenous peoples we have today. Some of them recognized through a law as ethnics existing in this territory. Some of them giving in important struggles, such as the Segnan peoples, where the state hasn't still recognized their existence. And the question might be, what's behind those elements giving tension and making us continue be in this resistance struggle? And although there are many variables and conditions because people indigenous have fought against it, without a doubt the knowledge and creation and validation of the knowledge has a lot to say there. From this university, the great University of Chile, the one we belong to, we have presidents of Chile. We have had political representatives from this university, important leaders in the entrepreneurs world, from the private world. And however, contributions being made to interculturality have been limited. We are dragging an educational model from schools which does not consider indigenous peoples as subjects of right. They still look at us as folk objects living in the past. And nowadays, when we are visible, probably you have seen that in the social network where we have several greetings and regards, but such as an underworld. You see, they teach us from our pre-existence, and they don't refer to our present existence. We are in history books, in some chapters, somewhere lost, where generally the examples taught to children have to do with the colonial thinking, and that make many children do not identify as indigenous or or feel pride for their identity, and that we are much more than dance and tongues, languages. Those are political conditions. A university end up being the same. When we see that educational models do not incorporate in a cross manner the indigenous peoples, and they don't refer to our epistemologies, our knowledge, as basis or as a permanent dialogue with other knowledge. Just one example I would like to mention. At this university, which is now 180 years old, no long time ago, probably a couple of years ago, we have an indigenous peoples policy that recognizes the role of the University of Chile, a university that has greatly contributed to strengthen those ideals of the state nation, to recognize there's an important role in building cultural citizenship, but is that not to be part of a dialogue of the daily life in each of our spaces, then that's a mere symbolism. If we still continue from a colonial logic, making indigenous people's knowledge our own and using them in our publications, in our thesis, without the recognition, without moving on to mechanisms incorporating, recognizing, legitimate that knowledge, then we will continue talking about mere symbolism. Nowadays, to offer the floor to my brothers and sisters here, we are facing a very complex historical moment. You are aware of it, you know this, and Pablo was mentioning it. This is a political character panel, that the advocacy for our rights, for the rights of our rights as Mapuche people, is a political claim of indication. We want to jointly build the terms of that coexistence, or that different coexistence, our new, or that new coexistence. And now we have the opportunity, and like what happened with our ancestors, of being in public spaces, to have the possibility to talk to you, who are also an important part in the transformation and the construction of knowledge to be made with different opportunities and contributions under the framework of a new political, with the rejection aiming to recognize the pluralism, in our territory. We want to continue contributing to that recognition. Universities, knowledge center can no longer acting behind indigenous peoples or looking at them from a colonial place of thinking. We need to shake ourselves of these ways to understand knowledge and open ourselves so that indigenous people do not have cosmovisions. We have knowledge, we have methodologies as well as epistemologies. And we want, because we know the problems we will face in the short term are complex: climate change, resource scarcity. 80% of biodiversity of the planet is in the hands of indigenous peoples, and there is a proposal for a different development, an economic, social proposal we want to make available. But if we don't equal the terms of the dialogue, if we do not move on to an intercollarity, then it will become more and more complex reaching that place. We are hopeful, and we know that having a dialogue is key, and this is why we think it was very important to share in such a relevant opportunity as it is this one, some of our thinking, and also talk to you and see how we are nurturing a real changing agenda, recognizing legitimate, making legitimate the indigenous people as subjects of law. Thank you very much.
So I am honored to be here in this activity, in this context, in these humanities centers. I'm talking here about indigenous peoples, precisely, which is in this case in our country here in Chile. I'm continuing with the words of Verónica. Oftentimes we do not, we're not really thought as part of the human experience. So it seems that human experience in the mankind thinking, it is restricted to these letters, which no one denies how beautiful they might be. But they were written with European ink, and it was not European. It came from colonial European times, but the European thinking, it is expressed in literature, philosophy, art. And there's a reflection of this experience where indigenous people do not fit. We're just a stereotype, an illusion, a fantasy, a savage, a cannibal in Montaigne's essays. So it is someone who is there just to develop our fantasies or our nightmares, but he's not a real voice. It is not a voice. It does not have a voice because it is outside. It doesn't really match the human borderline. So talking about humanities and talking about indigenous humanities, it is a provocation. It is transformation as well. And I believe it is healthy in this case to open this reflection space. Basically because it allows us to do something which it is something that it is a blind spot or blurred spot in this experience, humanistic experience, which celebrates letters in the European fashion, which in this case are letters which are rooted in a project which is divorced from the human being with nature, with the earth. And it is precisely that that cannot be, in this case, mentioned to indigenous people. Indigenous people are the part of mankind. They are not monopolic, and they can, in this case, reclaim that they have been persistent. They have a deep relationship. They are constant relationship with the earth. As the thinker says, of the Krenak peoples, Alton Krenak, our history, it is connected with the story of earth. And European mankind does not really connect with it in the way we have done it. We're part of this earth because we think that we are made from earth. Mayas, we people, we're people from the corn. We were built by that being that is being or that has fed not only the Mayas, but the whole mankind, were also part, or the ones who come from, this relationship, tectonic relationship, these terrestrial forces in this dialectic of this Dendren and Kankai myth. So we come from the struggle from the ocean, the earth, and the different elements, and we're aware, and we're proud of that. And that's why indigenous peoples have at the same time a position towards the earth, which is a right, the land, the territory, what they build, what the indigenous experience builds, I mean, being an indigenous person, because we're part of a territory. And that is a huge difference between the ones who are not indigenous people. The relationship with the territory, with the land, with the earth, it is there. And when you go deeper into that, it is that basically. It is all. It is a close relationship. What makes the indigenous people is not a genealogy. It is not the type of blood. It is not a cultural continuity either. It is an attitude, fundamental attitude, to an epistemological attitude, which is also moral, in connection with the earth, and that is what that builds and make us the guardians of nature. And as Millaleo also mentioned, there's a panel excerpt of climate change. Now we are, I mean, in the agony of the earth. They acknowledged 2 years ago that most of biodiversity, it is, people, indigenous people are in charge of it. And it's been demonstrated that biodiversity, it is lower, it is not as destroyed in indigenous peoples as in other places. So we are safeguarding life, the life itself of this planet. And these are the elements that have not been part of this humanistic reflection or thought, neither of a reflection work in our own university. Here in our university, we do need all of the wisdoms that we need to overcome these paradigms, all paradigms, and we need to talk about interdependence. We may think about it theoretically, it is an interdiscipline. It is the relationship amongst all of the beings, the complementary of the experience, and also the reciprocity as a constitutive element of the social bonds. These are elements which are common to the ways, epistemological ways and forms, and social ones and legal ones of the indigenous peoples, with different histories or myths, but that is there. And it can be seen, it can be proved that it is part of what defines indigenous in all of the different expressions of it, the different peoples in this continent. That is what indigenous people are, and everything is related to a thought on how we are placed and seen in relation to the earth. So in that way, what we have as a memory in mankind, tradition and rationality, experience as well, it is highly limited by the weight of the wonderful European letters, but that deny this acknowledgement of these other letters, indigenous people with some writing, some other stories, histories, other visions, other dreams. Dreams are so important, in Peumas people, in the Mapuche culture. And that is something that has not been included into the humanistic thought, which in our university we usually harvest. Also, there's something that we need to be clear about. We're not talking about something which has to be subject of a research, or something that belongs to the past, archaeology, or something that we need to unbury. We're not here talking about something that we need to investigate or research in a museum because it is stuck in time. We, as indigenous people, we exist now. We exist right in the middle of all of you people, and we're still existing. We're here, and we're going to continue existing in the future. So this has a consequence which is fundamental. Our identities are not something fixed in time, and nobody's identity either. No identity is fixed. No identity it is unmovable or unmutable. Some days ago, we remembered the anniversary. One of biggest thinkers, humanistic European thought in its glory. One of those glories of the European thought, it is Julian Habermas. It was his birthday, one of the biggest thinkers still alive. And Habermas, when he expressed, and we talked about this conversation that we're having here in Chile, where they said that identity policies may fail the constitutional convention, and there is also a debate in the Europe and the USA. And he was asked, "What do you believe? Do the identity policies make this fail? I mean, the right wing in these progressive projects, emancipation projects? Well, these identity projects, as they make us sensitive towards justice, it is necessary, and they are based on a principle which is still quite universal. It is quite expansive, the European think of respect for everyone. So therefore, questioning the colonial past, remembering the strip of lands of Mapuche people, remembering the slavery Rapa Nui people was uh, under, the almost extinction of southernmost peoples in recent times, Yaganes, Cahuesca, Sedna people, remembering what they have suffered up until today with the ambitions of extractivism, I mean, Andine peoples in the northern part of Chile, it is universalism itself. But Havel was also pretty clear. The identities are not mutually unpenetrable. We live in a surrounding where we all live together and we're influencing each other and we're also helping each other. We're indigenous, we're here, you're also here. And we are now trying to make you be more indigenous and we're being more occidental. And that's not going to eliminate the indigenous people. So we can still exist and get rich knowledge from you and the other way around. And that means that for some fanatics from one side or the other, it may mean an energy. But we live and we come from a colonial history. We colonize and we were colonized. And colonizers, we live together and we're going to keep on living together for quite a long time. And our challenge is living together in a better way and learning from each other. So every single effort of acknowledgement, it is also an effort of reconciliation. I know that. This word, it is, I mean, bothering here in Chile. The word reconciliation has been a word that has been abused because some people want to forget about the past. But here we should remember that this is not Montezuma's vengeance. Indigenous people are not going to take colonizers out of the lands. Some of them they're not going to burn things, and that is not going to work. Even though some people have done it, the only good thing is that we should learn to live together. We should live a life of coexistence, interculturality, respect, and that shouldn't mean the negation of indigenous peoples. That is not going to mean the negation of the universals that help us to live together. That is our challenge. So now we're talking about this commission. Let's hope that this commission could do an effort in order to acknowledge. So therefore, it should also obtain some reconciliation. We have failed. We have failed. But it's going to be worth it to keep on trying. In the world, it's still being tried. We need to observe the commission of the residential schools. There is reconciliation there in Canada and the effects that it's having in order to go deeper into this repairment to indigenous peoples, this new coexistence in Canada. 20 days ago, it was presented this report from Verdad y Reconciliación. Sami, in Norway, it was read in Oslo Parliament. They read it for 30 years, all the deputies. They read it word by word. It was a report of 700 pages. Let's see if that is going to improve the Sami people's condition lives. Let's see if this commission here of Verdad y Entendimiento can also improve the conditions of Mapuche people here in Chile and for all of the Chilean people. Thank you very much.
Greeting in Mapuche language. I had made a basic introduction and Mapuche language, I say my name, I'm Mapuche poet, professor. My origin is Pehuenche Mapuche, a specification. They live in the mountains, in the Andes mountains. And I'm here invited to talk about indigenous epistemologies in this conversation session where I understand there are scholars from several places from the world. And I want to talk to you from that Mapuche epistemology, where I was fortunate to be bred. I was educated and raised by my Mapuche grandparents. And one thing they always taught to us, and they continue to teach it in the Mapuche culture, in the most traditional Mapuche culture, is that we need to think on your own, for your own. The basis of the Mapuche culture is that we need to learn how to think on our own. This is what is valued amidst the Mapuche peoples. When you don't think well, or when you don't express your rationale well, the old Mapuche mock at you. So since we are very young, we are taught to think on ourselves, that way to face the world. We learned from the observation, from the doing, and from the thinking. And all these things are all together. They are not split or separate. We are permanently doing things. And this is the way we have in the West to think, to talk without doing nothing is seen as laziness. So, from the Mapuche point of view, you will all be lazy because you are sitting down just thinking without doing anything. Something needs to be done. And I remember that because there is a former student here in the room, and during the first classes, I used to, when in the first classes, I was trying to make students to work while I was talking to them, something manual, for example. And at the university, this is not as simple to have philosophy or literature students or from other degrees to do manual things. It's kind of difficult and weird, so to speak. And besides, to be thinking and listening while they do these things. That was the traditional learning way, Mapuche style. And in that traditional way, what we acquire is the kimun Mapuche word. That's the word to refer to knowledge. In Mapuzungun, rakifuam is the Mapuche word for thinking. And as I say, is the most valued by the Mapuche peoples. This thinking after listening, after doing, is the rakifuam, and is the tukulpan, which is the memory. This permanent remembering not only what I have learned by doing and listening, but also all the family, community, history. I don't need to know who my parents were, from they were come from, my grand or great grandparents, and all the story behind. You were able to remember with the characteristics of each one, because that is all part of our identity. And all that is joined to the territory, which is the Tugun, the Mapuche word for original territory, the territory from where my ancestors come and from where I come, marks what I am, because that nature, that tree, that plant, that river, that land laying down there is also part of myself. That's where my newen is, another Mapuche word. This is where I get my newen, my strength, my energy to live and to do and to be who I am. My newen is different from Veronica's, from Salvador's, and from each one of you. Each one of you has your own newen, strength, power to do what you do. This is what makes you be who you are. This is what our grandparents used to say. This is my grandfather used to tell me. And he used to tell me that through a type of specific speech which is called Niulam, which is the advice. Mapuche people give advice to each other. They take time to tell others, this is the way you do things. During your life, you will have to behave this or that way. And my grandfather used to tell me, listen to me, you will always have to use nice words. He used to tell me that in Spanish. This is in Mapudungun, or the Kumufundun very has a great importance between the community relation, within the community relation, because express yourself well, or komidukun, speak with good manners, implies not only speaking beautifully or pronouncing beautifully or elaborating a speech well. It also means to exercise the dignity I have as a person. When we speak well, we are objects of respect and respect others. All these implicancies are in this word, kumedungun. Good words, proper words, decent words. We need to do everything, and we need to be situated before the world with good words by respecting others and also receiving respect and dignity. Those things we claim, or we, in political terms, for the Mapuche peoples is much more relevant, probably more than for the Eastern world, because when we are disrespected, because when somebody disrespects us in the Mapuche territory, that person has to leave that place to other place and generate a life to be respected. You can not stay where you're not respected. You need to find a way to generate that respect. All Mapuches need to be respected because we are people. This is what my grandfather used to tell me. He used to say, these Winca, these Eastern people, maybe they think we are not people when we thought Winca means the foreign, the Chilean, the one that is not Mapuche. That's the meaning of Winca. And my grandfather used to tell me, maybe they think that I am not a person. Maybe they think that I am not a Che. Che means person. It's losing something. It's stop being Che, stop being a person, stop being a Mapuche. And Mapuche means people from the earth. So these things are pretty joined in our training, and they have collided brutally with the Occidental education, with the West education. Those who been raised in between these two cultures suffered this in a less degree that those who confronted us before us. They had to be silent. They needed to assume a culture, a different culture. I studied at the Frontera University in the year 1988. There was a Mapuche group. Then I was much more protected than my mother when she attended school, because there was a student group, the ones I was an ally, and the ones I took part in. That's a fundamental thing at universities, and it's a fundamental thing to us who are the others compared to you. Reaching or arriving at a space where you can find this type of groups, this referent. And everything I'm saying now has to do with the special day we're celebrating today. Those who live in the south cone of Latin America know this better, and it's the day of the Guiñol Tripantu, or the New Year, the Mapuche New Year. Is the day of renovation. On this day, we are all renewed. Therefore, we hold a big celebration early in the morning. We have to bath in rivers, you see, in streams. That was when communities live in their own territories. All communities lived close to a body of water. Mapuches consider water very important, whether this is a river, a stream, a spring, because that was they could find medicine, herbal medicine, water for drinking, because around that body of water, the Ñem were there, the spirits, the protective spirits, helping us as Mapuches, protecting us somehow. And we also had to protect that Ñen, those spirits. Mapuches do not extract anything from the earth without asking for authorization to the earth. We need to sing or pray before extracting a plant or a fruit, because I am extracting something from that space, and I also need to leave something there. All Mapuches used to leave some food at the different places where they extracted anything. Extractivism, as we know it now, was never to be even imagined in Mapuche culture, because that was going to cause death of the community. It was going to cause damage to the Ñem. Then the Ñem was going to cause harm to us. Everything happening through the extractivism is cause for diseases in Mapuche people, as it was a cause of disease for the Mapuches arriving in Santiago in the early 20th century. Many of them got sick in this city because they were not in the territory. Neither was there ñen or strength. This new land was unknown. We had to or they had to generate their own space. That was impossible in the context they arrived in here. But nowadays, Wetripantu, Weñol Tripantu, as I was telling you, is a day for celebration. So those who want to celebrate can do so. Of, hopefully, we should have a carnival as it is in other countries, because it's a celebration for a new spin of the sound around the earth. It's a real life. And this is what happened to us. As animals change their hair and skins, we also humans renew our energies. And I want to say two things that have to do with what been said before, and is regarding the dialogue. Mapuche culture is recognized through the Araucana book, which is a warrior culture. It's also a very dialogue generating culture. The word was the product of previous dialogues. This is why Mapuches had a lot of parliament with the Spaniards, trying to find peace, trying to reach agreements for respect of the territory, for their culture. Deep down, they wanted a space for freedom, and this is why they held these parliamentary negotiations. And when there was no an agreement, then war came, and we live 300 years doing that until the Chilean state, without declaring the word, simply interfered in our territory and colonized it until today. We are colonized peoples. That's a reality. Although some people do not want to accept that. That's the context we live in. And finally, one very relevant question in terms of rights, human rights, is ending indigenous people exclusions. And that implies indigenous people being everywhere, also in the academy, as we have made it here when generating these spaces. But in Latin America Academy, we should have our presence. This room should be full of people from different original peoples. At least we have from the Afro-descendant peoples, and I am glad to see that. I think that is pretty relevant. There's also a huge debt to those Afro-descendant peoples which were forcibly brought to this continent, but now are part, being integrated, and they cannot be made invisible. The struggle we continue to give is many times joined to the Afro-descent struggle and also the migrant struggle. We demand the most basic, what should be the basis, respect for our rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these presentations. I believe it's important. If you want, please, you, you could please comment or ask, do you have any questions or concerns? Do you have any dreams? Do you have hopes of what it means building an academy, intercultural academy, or what it means moving humanities, knowledge, epistemology into a conversation dialogue of pairs? This is not a dialogue where someone speaks from reason and the others just listen. So here we're going to get transformed. So to do so, we need our knowledge to be shared and going out from private spaces where we have lived them, and they need to be in public spaces, spaces of power, spaces of debate. So now, if you have any question, comment, the floor is open. Muchas gracias por un panel tan estupendo. Gracias por su gran crítica, su crítica de los humanos y del humanismo. Al escuchar su
indigenous communities, but also it's a concept that is detached from water, air, the environment and everything else. So my question is, how do you think cultural protocols and practices of academic institutions limit indigenous contributions or epistemological contributions, and how do you think you can break through those kind of limitations? Thank you so much.
So I'm going to speak in my traditional Navajo language. Yat she ya hidir kabiyorian shia look at the initially nasht ejetopa a dashache ado nakai dashanele bitast e de nasha ado tucson de cash agot ego the nestan initially. So I just properly introduced myself in my Diné language, which so my tribe comes from the Navajo Nation located in northern Arizona, which is one of the largest federally recognized tribe in the United States and the largest land base in Arizona. And it's more just, I wanted just, I don't have a question, but it was more commending all of you about speaking about the indigenous peoples here in this surrounding area. And one thing, as you were talking about just the way of life, there was some commonality of my people and the way of life, that the way we look at things. One of you had mentioned about some teachings. It is basically, what you do, it's up to you and how you look at things moving forward. And in my way, that was very similar, is that when we are taught when we're little by our grandparents, by our Shamasane do Shache do Shacho, which is the concept of looking at things of what you do, the decisions you make. In Navajo, we call it it is up to you on the decisions that you do. But that's all I wanted to say is ahihat. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I wish to add something, but first of all, to greet you for the knowledge and wisdom we imparted to us, which is very important. I am Renato Janine Ribeiro, from Brazil, from the University of São Paulo, and I'm the current president of the Brazilian Association for the Advancement of Science, em português, Sociedade Brasileira para o Progresso da Ciência. For a very fortunate coincidence, I did not know today is the holiday of the Mapuche New Year, the beginning of the solstice of winter. And for a fortunate coincidence, we have created a calendar for the year 2023 and the beginning of 2024 dedicated to the indigenous people of Brazil. And I gave copies to Pablo, Oyarzún, and to Andrés, Claro. And I sent Andrés the link, the internet link for if anyone wants to download it. So it's a kind of homage I'd like to address to you for your work, your expertise, and your intentions, which are very important. Thank you.
Owohali gili yona inegianta ilo ilimona asagalagante. Aho soy Meili de Nación Cherokee y también tailandesa. Soy Two Spirit, soy queer también y los ofrezco mis saludos de mi corazón. Gracias. En los Estados Unidos están practicando las universidades una forma de reconocimiento de la tierra en eventos.
In different events, activities, for instance, they're acknowledging that we are on the lands of Mapuche people and things like that. But oftentimes it is something which is symbolic, which we don't really have. We don't have centers of indigenous research. We do not have any power. They're not acknowledging that the institutions just exist because they stole the land, the earth, indigenous territories in order to exist. So, is there any work of recognition or recognizing that some other universities have some richness because they have practiced slavery through time? It is interesting to think how this richness that some institutions have, universities have the richness because they have stolen the earth from indigenous people. I don't know if you have any studies about that or any suggestions on how to get into this conversation, this dialogue, with an open heart or with words to acknowledge that the territories belong to you because they might be Inca or Mapuche territories, but for me, they always say that we do not belong here, and they justify their projects in that way, their colonization projects in that way. Thank you. So there's a question over here related to your question. It's a question about the academic protocols that sometimes stop the indigenous interventions and how these indigenous interventions enrich also universities. These two questions are connected. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I am Emilien from Cincinnati University in the USA. Thank you very much for your excellent presentations and for your work in general terms. So my question has to do with this current situation in Chile, the political context in which the constitution and the constitutional proposal was not passed or approved, and the plurinational agenda was not passed either. So I'd like to know, what do you think about the plurinational agenda in this historical moment here in Chile, and how do you foresee the future of this agenda and this proposal? Thank you. Let's see. Just to give the floor to Salvador and Maribel, I'd like to answer some of the questions that you have asked so we can have a conversation, so we can have a dialogue from our different viewpoints. How beautiful, in a space like this, it is beautiful to have this diversity. It is beautiful. Because when we look at each other's, we have different languages, we have different identities, we have different stories, and we're sharing them all. And you said in some of your questions, there are important challenges here. Salvador, Maribel, and for me and for many other people, indigenous people, educational spaces were forbidden or places to hide, to invisibilize. Our last names, clearly our Mapuche last names, were mocked at, and usually they're mispronounced. And we were there as a boy or as a girl, waiting not to be called by our last name because otherwise we would be mocked at. And we were trying to, I don't know, to not to be seen. We didn't really want to be seen by others. There are many examples about that. There were some notebooks. I mean, the conqueror is brave on a horse. The indigenous person, it is poor. And it is there on the floor, usually, right? It feels like insignificant. We need to grow with that. University is a powerful space, but it is also a space, as you mentioned, with many different challenges. Because explicitly, it is not mentioned how minimized we were, and the knowledge it is also minimized, it is quite present. It is present in infrastructure. It is also present in the readings. It is also present in the classrooms, in the problems that we work in classrooms. It is also present in the ways in which we do research, in the way in which things are mentioned and questions are done, which create the development of knowledge and research. So therefore, we need to break all of those symbolic elements. They are not mentioned, they are not said, but knowledge, indigenous knowledge, it is seen in a hierarchy which is lower to the Western knowledge. And many public policies, which are designed with those limitations, they usually have a bias towards those hierarchies. Children, when they see in their classrooms a teacher, a professor, which is Western, who went to university, he's got a degree, versus the one who's got a kimun, Maribel said, right? This knowledge, indigenous knowledge, the child, I mean, they see both of them in front. He knows that there's a knowledge which is valid for life. And there's another one which is kind of a folklore, which is an anecdote. The uncle or the aunt is telling stories. Children don't even call them teacher, they call them aunt or auntie. The uncle, someone who's teaching counting in Mapudungun language, telling some stories or some words in Mapudungun language. So the challenge is huge because we go deeper into the structure, modifying the ways in which approximations or approaches to knowledge or education is. We need to open and we need to include. This is not a statement. This is part of the changes, important changes that need to be done in the way in which everything is understood. This knowledge, which is intercultural, and interculturality comes from when we validate other cultures, which in this case, and we're more than just a culture, we're nations with our own institutionality, with our own languages, with our own rules, regulations, with our ways of learning. Maribel mentioned, said that we needed to learn with the Western pace in order to open some new spaces to make our knowledge visible. Before giving the floor to my colleagues, talking about the agenda, plurinational agenda, I mean, for us, it is an agenda which is still alive. Nevertheless, what happened with this constitutional project? We know we need to advance on that. We've been more than 200 years trying to change this state. And even though the acknowledgement may be limited in a constitution, that is not going to stop our struggle, our fight for offering new ideas, for mentioning this concept, Western concept of democracy, participation, political representation, powers of the state. And that is a commitment that we have from this university, helping, contributing with ideas to that debate, contributing to that dialogue, which is intercultural, about what Salvador said, mentioned, and this reciprocity between you and us. We're also taking all of these thoughts and reflections in order to problematize them and transform them into knowledge and proposals as well. Maribel? I believe that there's a question, basic question here of us Mapuche people, which allowed us to continue even though we have been defeated over and over. We are stubborn. And I said, I really mean it. It is funny, but I said, we're stubborn. It is like if they say, if no didn't exist for us, it is like no doesn't exist for us. If it doesn't work once, we're going to do it again in a different way, over and over again. If we want to achieve something and we're clear about it, then we're going to insist on that and we're going to do it over and over again. And we have been doing that for quite a long time. Mapuche people, by the end of the 19th century, when the territory was, our territory was included into the Chilean territory, and they said, you're going to be Chilean people, and they believed what they were offered, and they believed in these agreements after war and the military occupation. Then a long time happened, and they had this idea that everything in this new context was going to be good up until they realized that it was not being good. It was not good. It was not fair. So rapidly, from this way, Chilean way of getting organized, there were some Mapuche organizations being raised. So at the beginning of the 20th century, there were some mutuals, Mapuche mutuals. There were some Mapuche unions. There were also some the same organizations that Chilean people had built. Mapuche also had built them. They took them, they copied the structure in order to defend their rights as Mapuche people. So in that way, in the year 1927, they had a deputy, Mapuche deputy, and then another one. So there have been many Mapuche deputies in the whole Chilean history, and they have been there trying to defend from the Chilean institutionality the indigenous topics and issues. So they have tried to find different alternatives. When CAM, this body, organic, I mean, to do some terrorist attacks which are so criticized because that is a violent resistance, that is a response after a century of being there fighting and struggling with the same tools that the system was giving or providing. But this is not permanent. It's not been permanent in time. We have always tried to find a dialogue, and we have used many different tools. And in order to go to schools and universities, it's been the same situation, same struggle all through the 20th century. The demand for education, it is there from the indigenous people in general terms, not only the Mapuche people. In 1925, they had this teachers gathering in Argentina, Buenos Aires. That document, one of the things that they mention in that document is the teaching that universities should have at least one subject of indigenous topics talking about history and languages. So that was an agreement of Latin American professors. The, the bad thing is that at universities, they didn't really advance on that, even though they had agreed upon that. So here in Chile, just in indigenous policies in the year 1993, they have included that. Almost, they copied the same paragraph, the same article that says that universities should have at least one indigenous subject addressing at least language and culture. That is still not done. It's not been met. Here at university, they created this indigenous subject, but it is a subject as an extension lecture, so it is done outside university. It is an important work, anyways, at the social sciences faculty. But we're still missing within the university training. We need to include indigenous topics. How do we include them? We have fought. We have, with Salvador and Verónica, we have struggled all through the possible means. And the University Senate, in that sense, which was led by Verónica, was our ally in order to install an indigenous policy. So now what we're doing, we're trying to make that policy that was already passed institutionally, it should be implemented in the university. So that's where we're at this or in this university. This negotiation, as I said before, it's been part of what we want to do. It is something that we do, and we're trying to negotiate with the university, inside the university. This Western thought, it is also part of us, of course. When I do all of this reasoning, in order to explain what knowledge, Mapuche knowledge is, it's because I had to do a processing of what I have learned, what I could read, what I've read about Mapuche culture. I've gone through this Western sieve and my own sieve, right? And this filter. I have a Western my head, it is divided into these two cultures. And I have to explain myself, oftentimes many things, in order to explain them properly and in order to understand them properly as well. Thank you. Well, they have talked about education, and I want to talk about research. The university, Universidad de Chile especially, is seen, as it happens everywhere, all over the world, in this capitalism, academic capitalism, it is a factory of knowledge. And in this factory of knowledge, indigenous people are also part of the objects, set of objects that this knowledge and this research has to, include. And different. I mean, I don't believe, I don't think that there's something so different here in the rest of the world. Maybe they have more resources, of course, and more centrality, but the difference here is that we do not have protocols regulating respect for the rest of the indigenous peoples in this production of knowledge. At the most, there are, for some interviews, there is some informed consent, and when communities are questioned by different generations, these waves of researchers, which come from our faculties, they try to create and manufacture knowledge related to indigenous peoples. Well, they take indigenous people as informants, but there's no respect, there's no protocol making them or respecting the self-determination of indigenous peoples or communities, regulating the use of their knowledge. So in that sense, as in some other aspects of life here in Chile, capitalism, academic capitalism, it is also a savage capitalism here in our country. It has no regulation, it has no protocols. In some other countries, which are also factories of knowledge, there are protocols. And they have developed that through time. We do not have any protocols in this university, neither in any other part of the country. The National Agency for Research, ANI, does not have a protocol of research, which is specific for indigenous peoples. This is in a country with a population which is quite important of indigenous people, and that is not acceptable. It is a shame. And they don't really care. There's no commission or work group working in order to create that type of protocols as they exist in some other countries in Latin America, not to mention only the USA or Canada. Later, talking about structural dimensions, there's no funds, special funds for research for indigenous peoples, neither in this university nor in the country, all over the country. There's no public funds, so there's no line of development where the country has set something in order to create a knowledge which is useful, which is interesting about indigenous peoples. So in that sense, clearly indigenous peoples not only are just an object of research, they do not think of us as a subject. We're just an anecdote subject. We're not even permanent or relevant into the research priorities of the country. Nevertheless, they are always struggling with us or fighting with us. The research now, it is quite tied or connected to this new region of extractivism or development, lithium, green hydrogen, and curiously, they are right in the middle of where indigenous people live. So there they realize that we don't have any knowledge and we don't know which are the ways or manners to take decisions, make decisions. How indigenous people are going to decide something, and that is something we should have in our hand, and university should have contributed with and created it a long time ago. We have a problem. There is violence in the southern part, ethnic violence. We have promises which have not been met, but we don't really know which is the magnitude of that demand of land. When universities, for quite a long time, they should have known that. They should have created a contribution about that, because there's no research with the, or indigenous people, neither in this university nor all over the country. Talking about the lands, I want to say that yes, of course, nothing is said with symbolism. Symbolism, it is relevant. It is important to ask for forgiveness, to create some gatherings, to find common points. But the land, the territory needs to be given back. according to the legal rights. The states have the right, the obligation, as has been mentioned, to give back lands to indigenous people. Not because the state says that. Those are indigenous lands, territories, because they're ancestral occupation territories, and the state has the duty to title those lands in that way. And the state has not done it, or has done it partially with just some titles, and half of them are in hands of some other owners. So the state needs to has or meet their commitments, their duties. That is a way of solving territories. With the symbolism, nothing is going to be achieved. And finally, talking about the agenda, plurinational agenda, the truth being said, the contingency, especially the global contingency, this shift towards extreme wing in the world, it struck us really hard. And I believe that it's part of our own mistakes. I mean, our indigenous representatives have also made mistakes. And the ones who were working on this, or the ones who are working in indigenous policies as well, our mistakes were also important, relevant. But the need is still there. The demand is still there. The need of the Chilean people of having a well living with the rest of the peoples living here, it is still there. So therefore, beyond, because of a situation, environment, or climate, beyond there is a feeling or sensation of the political elites that there is no possibility to advance into this agenda, indigenous rights. Well, now that is going to be a problem, and it will be seen and manifested in the future. All of the countries have had experiences like this, doing some iterations with acknowledgement of the indigenous people rights. What's the singularity? In our case, that it's been too late and it's been too long. This story is not finished. And if now, in this new constitutional process, they want to create a constitution as it is seen, in, as it's been seen with the expert, with little acknowledgement of indigenous people, I mean, the story is not going to be finished here either.
I understand that well, due to time, we'll probably take just one or two more questions. Thank you very much. I'm Javier Duran. I come from Arizona. With we are in Tucson, land of the Tobogatan and the Pascuaquillo-Games. Binational nations crossed by a border, both of them, facing different problems in different sites. Very similar, but with some nuances. For example, part of the research in terms of protocols and respect to communities, but at the same time, opportunities to create an hemisphere dialogue, something more concrete, particularly in humanities. This knowledge, which are humanities from the communities, deserve those spaces, and I believe it would be important to use this forum and this organization, this consortium, to carry out those bridges in a more intentioned way, in particular when we talk about languages and positioning and relation to the earth. That is precisely what we talk about, but we should make those connections to the communities. Otherwise, it will be only just theory and conceptualization. And then it is impossible to make this concrete without having contact with our humanity, sometimes displaced, represented by indigenous communities. Then, to me, it is important to continue with this dialogue so that our consortium has some space for this dialogue, for this inter-American and trans-hemisphere dialogue, since we have community in other latitudes facing the same problems. Therefore, this is an invitation and an acknowledgement, and I do hope we can continue this conversation pretty soon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. And I will speak English because I'm Mexican American. I was born in Los Angeles, where there are a lot of Mexican people who do not speak Spanish since there been language violence. Y es por lo mismo que aprecio mucho, ¿cierto?, que puedan ustedes hablar del tema de la justicia en el idioma.
Porque es una it's a very necessary topic to address if we're going to have dialogue. And you asked us about our dreams. And so my dream would be that we could have a dialogue about music, since I research about music, but how the language of Mapuche dances in music, right? Moves us through music. Because soy chicana, México americana, y música es muy importante para to claim our dignity. So quizás podemos hablar mucho más. Gracias.
Yes, well, just to close, to conclude, to acknowledge all the questions and all the comments and these commitments. The interculturality cannot be built only by indigenous peoples. It's not just our struggle, it's everyone's, it's all the society's struggle. And institutions, universities are part of that society. We need to have allies in that struggle, in that dialogue, in that conversation, in order to provide new solutions to the new problems. And this is our duty and our commitment. Then once more, thank you very much for this space and for having us here, sharing ideas, reflections, and above all, dreams and desires that might be concretized soon. Thank you very much.